Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our final session of the year, whether you are watching on Zoom, Facebook, or listening via JAir, where we are now streaming these Australian Jewish Association Zoom sessions. And that would be on 88 FM in Melbourne or via the website j-air.com.au. My name is Alan Friedman. I'm Vice President of the Australian Jewish Association. And also visible on your screens are David Adler, who is President of the AJA, as well as our special guest for tonight, Efraim Inbar, who we will formally introduce in a moment. This week will be our usual interview style, where we will chat with Efraim for about 30 to 40 minutes, after which we will open up for questions from the audience. And as I mentioned, always, if you're watching on Zoom, the way to get our attention is to raise your hand electronically, and you do that by clicking on the reactions icon down at the bottom there. We are taking written questions. These can be placed on the chat function, and Robert Gregory, our Public Affairs Officer, will read out some of these in between the spoken ones. Okay, well, this time last year, we thought 2020 was so bad that we were looking forward to 2021, but the Delta strain had other ideas and COVID dominated our news services just about every night. But a lot took place around the world that wasn't COVID related, especially involving Israel and the Middle East. So tonight will be a recap and analysis of what happened with what happened, and we'll be speaking with one of the foremost experts in the field. Efraim Inbar will be well known to this audience as President of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security and a Professor of Political Studies at Bar-Ilan University. He's been a visiting professor at Georgetown, Johns Hopkins and Boston Universities, a visiting scholar at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, a Manfred Warner NATO Fellow, and a visiting fellow at the London-based International Institute for Strategic Studies. He was president of the Israel Association of International Studies, a member of the Political Strategic Committee of the National Planning Council, chairman of the National Security Curriculum Committee in the Ministry of Education, and a member of the Academic Committee of the IDF History Department, and he has also authored 5 books. Wow, he's an expert on Israeli strategic doctrine, public opinion, and national security issues, the US Middle East policy, in Israeli-Palestinian diplomacy, and Israel-Turkey relations. After all that, he is a very good friend of the Australian Jewish Association. Efraim, welcome back to our Zoom sessions. It's great to catch up with you again.
Thank you very much for the warm introduction, and I'm always happy to be with you.
Thank you, Efraim. Now, we've got a lot to cover tonight, and I'm going to start with the first topic, which was the election. That was probably the major event of the first few months of this year. And that was the 4th election that was held in March that resulted in Naftali Bennett, who is known for his hawkish views, becoming Prime Minister of what is essentially a left-wing government. What did you make of this result, and do you think the government will hold together?
Well, I think that the establishment of the Bennett-Lapid government ended a 2 years political crisis in Israel. And it passed its most important test last month when the budget was passed in the Knesset, which gives it some time to breathe. Of course, there are a lot of tensions and friction within this government that includes Bennett, and the Meretz and the Arab Ra'am list, but so far they seem to be able to overcome their differences, or basically to put aside their difference and do things that are within consensus. It seems that this type of government could be stable for the next year. I don't know what will happen afterwards. There are, of course, tensions. But, being a conservative, I welcome a government that doesn't do too many things. That's That's not bad. I'm afraid of too active governments that interfere in everything. So, we have some kind of, calm governments. They don't do things they cannot agree on, which is probably not so bad, if the status quo continues.
The surprise is the Ra'am party. I mean, this is really something that's novel. What do you make of their participation in the government?
Well, I think, first of all, at the public level, it's a good development because the leader of Ra'am, Abbas, made a few statements which were unexpected. He said, we know we live in a Jewish state, we accept it, we just want to get our share being citizens in the government. This looks as a good development. Of course, we don't know where their hearts are. Probably we know a little bit. One of their members met with Raad Salah, the leader of the Arab movement, Islamic Arab movement in Israel, the northern part, which is a very radical person. And there was some criticism about it. I think that we have to see how it goes further. In many ways, they behave like Haredi. They want money, they want to take care of their constituency, and this is part of politics. Having said that, and I think that 2021 was an important year in Arab-Jewish relations in Israel. We all remember the riots, the pogroms that took place in May this year, which put an end to the illusion that the Arab citizens of Israel are peaceful citizens. And even if this is true of the majority of the Arabs, Israeli Arabs, we have to act to make sure that a minority, and we don't know exactly how large this minority is, may act in another military encounter with an enemy. This is something which is on our mind. I think we have to increase seriously our police force in order to deal with this issue. So maybe, the integration of Ra'am and a forceful demonstration of Israeli sovereignty everywhere within the state of Israel will create a tolerable situation. But we should have no illusions about a minority within the Arab minority that is ready to be violent.
Yes, yes. Michael.
Yes, Shalom, Efraim.
Hello, Michael.
In February, the then Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu appeared in a Jerusalem court for a hearing in his corruption trial and formally denied the charges against him. How do Israelis see his legacy? Do you think that Israelis are secretly wishing that he was still back in charge?
Obviously, Netanyahu is still as a most popular candidate for prime minister, and Likud has secured in the polls, maybe 33, 35 seats in the Knesset if there are elections today. So he's still popular, but I think that we are facing the end of the Netanyahu period. I don't think that the Likud members want him to stay as a leader. I'm talking about the top echelon of the leadership. They are now in the opposition. Without him, they would have been ministers. So what do they want more? A Netanyahu leadership, or they sitting in nice ministerial cushions? So probably we'll see some kind of rebellion against him. And it's quite clear, to me at least, that without Netanyahu, we'll probably have a right-wing government in 10 minutes. We should remember the elections were a plebiscite on Netanyahu. And Likud members such as Saar and others, Bennett, of course, was ready to join a Likud government. It seems that Netanyahu, despite his great successes as prime minister, and you probably know where I stand vis-a-vis Netanyahu, and I appreciate very much what he has done for the state of Israel. And there are not too many people in the world in his league, but I think the Netanyahu era has come to an end.
Thank you.
David.
Efraim, I want to bring you back for a moment to the Arab violence, because as an external observer, it seems to be more problematic than just the conflict with Hamas that occurred in May. We've seen in the last couple of months an increase in terrorism around Israel. So what do you think can be done? What should happen in 2022? Do you see it getting worse, getting better? Do you see Israel gaining control? What sort of strategies would you be recommending?
Towards the Israeli Arabs or towards our Arab neighbors?
The Israeli Arabs, the ones that live, whether they're citizens or not. I include in that those that are on the eastern side of Jerusalem, that are regarded as part of the state of Israel.
Well, I think that we should enforce Israeli sovereignty everywhere. We see a tremendous rise in crime in the Arab sector. Not so much in East Jerusalem, but more in the other concentrations. And the response should be forceful. We should go in, make sure that there is no illegal weapons, search houses, act upon intelligence, of course, within the limits of the Israeli law, and to eradicate their tendency to illegal actions.
Okay.
But I want to point out that if we analyze the participants in the May riots, not all of them were with a criminal record or had problems with the police. We see that the motivation was nationalistic. So people without, any record, any or being suspected of criminal activities were participating in the riots due to their nationalistic feelings.
Do you think
there are two separate issues? We have to deal with the criminal elements as strongly as possible, and at the same time to try to isolate the very nationalistic elements within the Arab community in Israel.
Is Hamas influential in the Israeli Arabs?
We have to understand that the PA, the Palestinian Authority, and the PLO is continuously losing respectability and legitimacy among the Palestinians on both sides of the border. As a result, Hamas is gaining more influence. If there are elections today in the PA, a Hamas candidate will take over, which shouldn't surprise us. This is what happened in 2004 when they had the last time elections. Hamas won the elections. We don't like it, but Palestinians like Hamas.
Yeah.
They like Hamas primarily because of the corruption within the PA, because abuses of power by PA officials, and Hamas, for some reason which I do not fully understand, is seen as less corrupt, as being more willing to serve honestly their people. This is true of most Islamic movements all over the Muslim world. And this is why Hamas is increasingly popular. And of course, some of their supporters do not ask them, do I want to live in a state in which the Sharia, the Muslim law is governing life. But this is true. The nationalism among Palestinians is dwindling. By the way, also among Israeli Arabs, according to some polls which I saw, more Israeli Arabs, in contrast to the past, are defining themselves as Israeli Arabs rather than Palestinian Arabs.
Yep.
So on one hand, we see a majority trying to integrate within Israel of the Israeli Arabs. On the other hand, we see a very violent minority, which is a problem for the state.
Sure is. Well, one area where we have had some improvement, just changing the subject a little, is Israel's relationship with certain Arab countries externally via the Abraham Accords has been, seems to have almost been a bit of a new era, particularly the UAE and the others. With the change of administration in the United States, where do you see this going? Do you see the Abraham Accords expanding, staying the same? What's going to happen with the relationships with the Arab countries, Saudi, others that are sort of on the wings?
It is true that the Trump administration, the Americans, had an important role in bringing about the Abraham Accords. But the new administration in Washington is seen as getting out of the Middle East, and therefore its role in regional relationship becomes less relevant. Apart from that, the May events were a first successful test of the Abraham Accords. Basically, they saw Hamas attacking Israel, they saw Israeli Arabs rioting, and they didn't do anything about it. They just went on. Of course, they have clear interests in maintaining a good relationship with the state of Israel. The Emiratis, the Bahrainis are less ideological, are less radical in religious terms. They are actually fighting against radical Islam. To give you an example, at JISS, we have a partner in the UAE, the Trend think tank, and they are, we wrote together a piece on radical Islam in the Middle East, or on Turkey. This is what is their concern, less Iran, by the way. So they are very much interested also in the business opportunities that they see by having relations with Israel. Having said that, we should pay also attention to their dancing in the Middle East. Some high-level missions went to Tehran.
That's
And,
right.
you know, frankly, if I would be Emirati, I would do the same. You know, I want to be on the safe side. You know, America, the West doesn't look very strong nowadays. So they flirt with everybody. But so far, the Abraham Accords are stable.
Thank you.
Ephraim, of course, the Abraham Accords, we have to thank Bibi and Donald Trump, but of course the Jewish left would like to avoid that gratitude. In August, Naftali Bennett and US President Joe Biden met for the first time at the White House. How is the Israeli-US relationship traveling under his administration? Do you think Joe Biden is actually in control? I think it's a loaded question. What's your assessment of Antony Blinken, and how influential is the so-called squad?
First of all, I think President Biden is a friend of Israel. He's a typical, you know, Democrat. He's, you know, I met him several times actually when he was senator. He was friendly, but has some always some criticism. But I don't think that he would be the cause of trouble. Basically, if there will be trouble, it's because of his entourage, which is mostly Obama former officials that you know, became part of his government. They have illusions about how the world is running, although they may have an awakening with the Iranians. And it seems that they run a little bit out of patience with the Iranians, but this doesn't mean they are going to do anything about it. So we cannot rely on the United States to take care of our most, you know, difficult problem, which is Iran. The US-Israeli relations are fine. Israel decided, in my view, it was a mistake not to criticize the Biden administration for its behavior with Iran. We do criticize them in closed rooms, and we try to come to some kind of understandings, which I doubt very much if we'll be able to move them into action. The progressives, it's in the Democratic Party, they suffered some defeats recently in by-elections in the United States. Also, there was you know, a huge demonstration of friendship toward Israel in Congress when it voted on sending money for the Iron Dome to Israel. And actually, we are now starting to conduct a research on long-term trends in public opinion in the United States on Israel. And I want to mention one good news, and this is a growing number of Hispanics in the United States. The Hispanics are partly of a Catholic tradition, which makes them more conservative. And we see a large amount of evangelical communities within the Hispanic community, which again is good news. So, you know, I wouldn't join now all those that warn that US-Israeli relations are going to deteriorate seriously. In 2021, we have midterm elections in the United States and for Congress. And what I read, and I'm not an expert on the United States, but what I read is that the Republicans will probably gain the majority in both houses, which is again good news for Israel. Because the Republican Party is, in the past years, has been more pro-Israeli than the Democratic Party.
Yeah, Efraim, I just want to continue on about Iran. It seems to be fooling just about the entire world. Is Israel making progress in outlining the real dangers involved with their nuclear ambitions? And will Israel need to launch a serious attack? I mean, how would they deal with the facilities buried so deep in the mountains? And what would America's reaction be if this came to fruition?
Well, it's quite clear that our threat perception of Iran is much higher than the rest of the world. The rest of the world doesn't want nuclear proliferation. Nobody wants Iran to be a nuclear state. But this doesn't mean that they are going to do something about it. Despite the fact that, the French, for example, are more critical of Iran and want a more stringent agreement, despite the fact that maybe we see within the American administration second thoughts about Iran, I don't think we should expect that in case the talks in Vienna fail, we'll see American action. I'm talking about military action. The Iranians are very good at bargaining and procrastinating, and they are doing a wonderful job, in this respect. How will the America, and it depends basically on America. The Europeans are not going to do anything. The Russians and the Chinese are not going to do anything about it. So will America wake up? Maybe. Will they do something about it? I doubt it very much. So it's up to us. We are on our own on this issue. We should realize it. And Israel has not invested enough in recent years in preparing the military option. We're too busy with elections. Now this government allocated large sums of money to prepare for this eventuality. According to some military figures, we can do it. We all understand that it's not going to be an easy trip. It's not a piece of cake. It's much more difficult than previous preemptive strikes against Iraq or Syria. But in my view, and I have advocated, for years, a military strike is something that is very necessary. I don't think that we are number one on their list of enemies. But we cannot risk Iran having a bomb for several reasons. If you want, I'm ready to elaborate on that. Nuclear Iran is an existential threat to Israel that has to be eliminated.
Thank you.
Alan, back to you.
Thanks, Efraim. Let's talk about Europe for a moment. We saw that a rise in anti-Semitism in the UK at the time of the war with Hamas. So did relations between Israel and Europe generally get any better or worse over the year, do you think?
Well, I think we should not talk too much about Europe. One moment is enough, because Europe is not a real strategic actor. The anti-Semitism in Europe is not something new. For several years, it was not politically correct, particularly because of the Holocaust. And but people forget about it. They have a short memory, and Europeans do not feel any more guilty about the devastation of European Jewry during World War II. Apart from that, Europe hosts Muslim minorities. In France, we are talking about 10%. In Holland, 5%. So, and they are, they are democracies, and to some extent, they are responsive to those communities which are anti-Israeli. Having said that, Europeans, after all, are realpolitik. When they need us, for example, on science, they have this European plan. They come to us and they give us money to do research at the universities and other places because they need us. When they need us, for aviation, for example, so they don't pay attention that any airplane that comes to the Ben Gurion airport crosses a green line. You can't do it otherwise. So they are not so particular about the green line when their interests are at stake. So it's a game we are playing with them. There are still elements in Europe that are very pro-Israeli. Germany is probably the most important country. They just had elections. I don't see any disaster, in German-Israeli relations in the near future. But we have to be careful. Our foreign minister was successful in aggravating the Poles unnecessarily, in my view. Poland is an important country, and I think we should be very smart in our dealings with Europe. We have good friends in Europe. Again, not it's necessarily because they like the Jews, but because, for example, they hate the Turks. So Greece and Cyprus are an Israeli voice in the EU preventing a too anti-Israeli line in Europe. The Czech Republic has been a similar friend. We have friends in Italy. So it's a complex picture, and of course we have to understand that Russia is a new factor in European politics, and many Europeans believe that they are at the edge of paradise, in strategic affairs, and now they realize that the messianic days are not yet in, and they have maybe to defend themselves against the Russian aggression. So where do they get some kind of technology, for building fences, for example? Poland needs a fence, and other countries need fences. They come to us. So it's a very business-like relationship, and I think it should be like this. That's fine. But again, Europe is not an actor, a strategic actor in international relations. It's an important market for us. And again, they'll buy what they need. It doesn't matter if it's produced on which side of the green line.
I was interested in Sweden because in October, the Swedish Minister of Foreign Affairs visited Israel, and this was ending a 7-year diplomatic freeze after Sweden officially recognized the Palestinian state in 2014. So is this just a case of business as usual? Does Israel just move on even though the Swedes recognize something called a state of Palestine?
Yes, we moved on. We are pragmatic. Is there a Palestinian state? There is no Palestinian state. So if they recognize something that's inexistent, it's their problem. I don't think, we should be pragmatic. What is important is business. Declarations are less important. And this is true of anti-Semitism.
Yes.
Anti-Semitism, it's useful sometimes. I can tell you stories, when I met Turks and I told them, let's have a dialogue with Americans. Immediately I saw it in their eyes. Oh, the Jews are controlling America and let's do business with them. Come on. I understand that you living in the diaspora have maybe a different attitude toward anti-Semitism. This is something that has been in existence for 2,000 years.
Yeah.
It is existent in countries that don't have any Jews. This is, in my view, this is not maybe a popular view. I've never been politically correct. So it's a Goyish problem. Why should we be worried about the disease of the Goyim? Frankly, I wouldn't spend a penny on combating anti-Semitism. Why? It's my problem. It's their problem. They don't like me for some strange reason. I can't do anything about it. Why should I spend money? I think I have a nice face. I think we are useful citizens in every country, bringing prosperity. If somebody doesn't like it, that's his problem.
Yes, yes.
Interesting.
Okay, we'll go to questions. Just before we do, if you're listening on J-Air, this is a live simulcast of the Australian Jewish Association Zoom event, which we have every Wednesday night, but this in fact is our final event for the year. Our guest tonight is Professor Efraim Inbar from the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. We're having a bit of a chat about a review of 2021, and we'll mention Efraim's website later on. Okay, we'll go to questions. I've got Dennis, Ron, Reuven, Hugh. So Dennis, you were first up, so please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Good evening, Professor. I have a question. I received a news report on December 15 from Israel, which says a poll conducted by Shfa news outlet asked 1,200 Arab Jerusalemites, none of them Israeli citizens, regarding their preference for living under Israeli or Palestinian rule in the future. And 93% of them said that they would prefer to remain under Israeli rule. And if they couldn't get citizenship, they wanted to retain their identity card at least so that they could work and travel in Israel. If a similar poll was conducted in the West Bank with regard to would they prefer to be under Israeli or Palestinian rule, what do you think, because you must know the temperature of the people there, what do you think the result would be?
First of all, we should realize that there are two separate communities. The Arabs in Jerusalem have been under Israeli rule since '67. And since it's a rather young population, most of them don't know anything else. Simply, this is a fact of life. And they are fully integrated. I'm a Jerusalemite. They are fully integrated within the Jerusalem economy, into the Israeli economy. They can move freely because they have Israeli, residents with their identity cards. They can move freely in Israel. Also, their cars have Israeli licenses. So they are completely free to move and work and go to the beach. Tel Aviv is usually an attraction for them. They are not used to see the Jewish beauties, in bathing suites in East Jerusalem. So they are going and they are fully integrated. By the way, I'm surprised by the figure you mentioned. I knew about 70%, but 90% maybe. They are learning Hebrew more and more. There is a demand for studying Hebrew, understanding that the vehicle for integration is the language of Hebrew. Also, we see more and more high schools, kids going to schools which have the Israeli matriculation curriculum. And one of our researchers is working at the Ministry of Education. He was in charge of this program. every day, we don't meet the demand. More and more high school kids go to to schools with Israeli curriculum because they understand it gives them a better preparation for entering universities. So there are many benefits of being living in Jerusalem, and most people are not political, and they are not stupid. They want to live well. I'm not sure, we'll get similar results in the West Bank, in Judea and Samaria with the Arabs there, because they've been subject to Palestinian education since '93, which is very nationalistic and very anti-Israeli. So we should definitely expect different results. Some of the, business elite, or of course, they would like to be closer to Israel. There is a one-state option, of course, which some of them want, but it doesn't command the majority of the Palestinians. They still want to have some kind of separate entity. But we see that there is brides, Israeli Arabs buy their brides in the West Bank, and those are problems. We do not allow them citizenship. And this is, by the way, one issue that is on the table of this government, and there is no understanding yet on this issue. We don't want to allow them citizenship. But the Arabs in Jerusalem and the Arabs in Palestine, whatever we call it, are two different communities. Of course, we closed much of the border with the territories, so they have less access to Israel. They would like to have more, but I don't think they really want to be Israeli citizens.
Thank you. Ron, your turn. Please unmute yourself.
Hi, good evening, Professor. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. With all the attention facing east, I've read some while back that Egypt is quietly increasing its capabilities that go beyond defense, especially in the Navy and so on. What is your comment about this, especially after a Sisi era? I mean, we spoke about the Netanyahu era, but post-Sisi era, how do you see this? Do you have any comment about what Egypt is doing quietly?
Egypt is doing many things quietly, and we know what they are doing, and they share some of their plans with us. The strategic relationship between us and Egypt is very good. They are fighting an Islamist insurgency in Sinai. We do help them in many ways. Assisi also needs us in Washington, because the Biden administration is sensitive to human rights violations in Egypt, less so than in Iran. And we are trying to help them to get their support, financial support. Our lobby is working on that. And so there is actually a close strategic relationship between Israel and Egypt, but, and there is a big but, no people-to-people interactions. This is not Abraham Accords. It's a different type of relationship. Egypt, the most important Arab country, made peace with Israel, violated the taboo against relations with Israel, but has not allowed, and is continuing not to allow, people-to-people interactions, which makes this type of relationship qualitatively different than the relationship we have with the Abraham Accords countries such as UAE, Bahrain, Morocco.
David, have we got any written questions at this point?
Yes, we do have a few written questions. There's an interesting one about China, and China and Israel have worked together on a number of projects, infrastructure, technology, market, etc. But then China is also supporting Iran quite actively. So in the event of a conflict, would you see China staying out of it or taking one side or the other? Where might that play out, Efraim?
Well, China has investments in Israel. It's interested very much in Israeli technology as other countries, and is an important market for Israel. About $10 billion, which is substantial. And I'm not including Hong Kong, which is a different county. So China, we have a good relationship with the Chinese, not too many areas of conflict. The Americans think that we are too liberal in selling technology and allowing them to invest in Israeli infrastructure. Maybe they have a point, and we made, I think, some mistakes in the past. Now we are a bit more careful, also because of the American pressure. On the issue of conflict with Iran, China will not do anything. They actually, they are somewhat sorry that the Americans are leaving, or they are not entirely leaving, because they are not ready to be the security provider for, in the Gulf area, which is an important source of energy for China. So not doing anything is not doing, verbally it's a different thing. Say things, and that's a different issue. But we don't pay too much attention to what people say. We pay attention to what people do.
Yes. Reuven, please unmute yourself, and then Hugh.
Hi. Yeah, my question regarding an attack on Iran would also have to mean an attack on Hezbollah and Hamas at the same time simultaneously, because they're the proxies from Iran, and they're loaded with rockets, and they're just probably waiting for the opportunity for the word go. How do you see that situation? Or will it be three fronts, not hit?
Good question.
Yeah.
If we go after Iran, we should expect that they will activate their proxies, be it Hezbollah, which has great capabilities to harm Israel, because the tremendous number of missiles, we're talking about 150,000 missiles in their arsenal, and also jihad, Islamic jihad in Gaza, which has much less of a capability. Hamas, we don't know. It's not a real proxy. It has some kind of independence. But we may see also, attacks from Syria. The Iranians have proxies and militias in Syria. They try to establish missile launching pads in Syria. We of course, the campaign between wars, we are trying to minimize those capabilities. We try also to minimize the transfer of accurate technology to add accuracy to those missiles. And this is something we have to take into consideration. And we may pay a price for, in this respect. In my view, the price is right. It's less than a nuclear bomb on Tel Aviv.
Thank you. Hugh, we'll make you the final question. We've just got a few minutes. So what's your question, Hugh?
Professor Inbar, your foreign minister, Yair Lapid, was in Britain at the end of last month. And we heard some very positive reports coming about the relationship between Britain and Israel. To what extent do you think that Israel can rely on Britain as an ally, given our rather checkered past, especially when we go back to the mandate?
The UK is not our ally. The UK is a friend, and the UK is not committed to the defense of Israel. And we shouldn't expect any British contingent to join us on our trip to Iran. They may decide not to criticize us. They may decide to applaud, particularly if it's successful. But generally, you know, for our critical security needs, we have no ally. This includes the United States. We have to do it by ourselves. And it's, of course, nice to think that we have allies, but we don't.
Efraim, just one more from me. What the squabble between Donald Trump and Bibi and he said, she said, what did you make of all of that?
Well, we know the personality of Trump, and I hardly think what alternative did Netanyahu have when Biden was elected. Well, he should have said, no, I'm sorry, you are not elected. You know, he's the prime minister of Israel. He has to say what is expected of him. And Donald Trump doesn't like it because, you know, he is not a big maven, you know, on international relations. So, but this is very typical of Trump, you know.
Yes, but do you think it perhaps damaged his legacy a little bit with regard to how friendly he is with Israel?
No, I think that what's important is his deeds. What he has done, you know. So he doesn't like Netanyahu, fine. So, but he's still a friend of Israel, and I think many Jews, of course, voted enough for him, not enough. But you know, in my talks with American Jews, I try to tell them that in the next elections, not to support a Trump candidacy because he is a too divisive figure in American politics, and it's not good for Israel. It's not good for America. First of all, we need a strong America. And another run for presidency by Trump will create so many emotions which Israel will be caught in. So I think there are other good Republican candidates that can win. And
do you have a favorite?
We should look forward. You know, the past was past. And we should thank him for what he has done. He has done great things for the state of Israel. I'm ready to bless him every Shabbat in my synagogue, but that's it.
Do you have a favorite out of the alternatives, Efraim? Who would you like to see run for the Republicans?
I really, you know, I'm not knowledgeable enough about those figures, and I know maybe DeSantis, but it's also too early to say who are the real candidates that have a real chance to unite the Republican Party. I'm afraid of a split in the Republican Party, by the way, if Trump continues with his line. So we need a candidate that is reasonable. And, you know, reasonable is not necessarily an adjective that goes together with Trump. So we need some, you know, more a conservative figure, which is reasonable and can win the elections and implement, you know, good policy, foreign policies, but also domestic politics. We should, you know, my institute enjoys donations from abroad. Unfortunately, what you can buy with $1 in Israel now is less and less. And this is partly a result of the inflationary pressure by Biden's spending. So this is something which I don't think it's good for the United States to have a weak dollar. No. And you know, the economic policies pursued by Democrats are problematic, and we want a strong America, of course, in military areas, but also in economically.
Yes. Thank you. Look, we do need to cut the questions at this point because it is our final session for the year. I'll just hand over to David and he can let everybody know what's happening next year.
Thank you, Alan. Well, I'll just give a very quick glimpse of our first two speakers that we have lined up. We get off really quickly with some major names after a few weeks break. On the 2nd of February, we have Melanie Phillips from the UK, and on the 9th of February, Carolyn Glick. So that's something to look forward to, very incisive, also non-PC commentators. And as I always do, please don't go through the holiday period without completing these minor tasks. If anyone here is not yet a member of AJA, go to the website, jewishassociation.org.au. You can join, or you can make a donation. We do need resources, and make sure you like and follow the AJA Facebook page, which is now the largest Jewish organisation platform according to social media followings in Australia. We hope to come back strongly and to gain more successes. I'll just show again, for those that might not have seen it, our recent success with Qantas in getting our national carrier to change their terminology on their booking platform, because for a short while it was inconsistent with the Australian government policy and did refer to a non-existent state of Palestine or even occupied Palestinian territory. Those terminologies have gone as a result of the advocacy of AJA, and we've had a whole series of other successes as well. So hopefully back to see everyone in 2022 and kick lots of new goals.
Yeah, thanks, David. I've put Ephraim's website up on the chat, so please have a look at that. There's lots of good information there, and of course, if people are inclined to make a donation, I'm sure that wouldn't go astray. I'll just hand back to Michael, and he can officially thank Ephraim before we leave.
Thanks, Alan. I just want to stress, carry on from David. I get a lot of people saying, you know, we do a great job at AJA. We really do need funding and support as membership. That's very important this day and age. So whatever you can do to help would be appreciated. Ephraim, you've been a regular visitor to Australia over many years and a very good friend to both Alan and I during our radio program, Nothing Left, and since then a great friend of the AJA. You always make yourself available whenever we've asked you for your time. We respect you for your hard work, dedication, and superior knowledge of the complicated Israeli political scene and Middle East issues. On behalf of the AJA, we thank you once again for your analysis tonight. We wish you and your family a safe 2022 and look forward to catching up with you again next year. Shalom, shalom.
Shalom. Have a good 2022.
Thanks, yeah, thanks, Ephraim. Thanks for me. I endorse everything that Michael said. It's a pleasure to have you with us, and we'll certainly do it again next year.
Inshallah.
Yeah. Now, JAIR listeners will be returning to their normal programming about now. Also, just before we go, the L'chaim program with Morris Klein is on air at 9 o'clock. That's on 3ZZZ, FM 92.3 or 3ZZZ.com.au. But that's all we have for tonight and for this year. We started these sessions when COVID arrived, and we've been absolutely thrilled with the responses we've received from all sectors of the political community. Maybe not all, but all the ones that count. The other communal organisations do a Zoom event every few months, and they can have anywhere from a handful of people watching to a couple of hundred. But we achieve 100 to 150 on Zoom, plus around, could be another 100 extra on Facebook. And we do this every week. And that's fantastic. So thanks, of course, to David, who is my main collaborator in the AJA, but also to Robert Gregory and and Michael Bird for their input. But particularly, I want to say thank you to all of you, our audience, for the support of AJA and your participation in these sessions. We believe that the AJA is making a real difference, and we're pleased to represent those of us in the community who take issue with the relentless promotion of the leftist agendas. As David said, don't forget to keep up to date with what the AJA is talking about on our Facebook page. Please like it and share it widely. But for now, I want to wish all of our Christian friends a very Merry Christmas. Everyone else, have a great break, and we look forward to seeing you all in February next year for what will no doubt be another eventful year in Israel advocacy. Efraim, thank you again. Lovely to see you. And for the final time this year, I wish everybody a very good night. Bye for now.